"Don't cry, no one will save you," my ex said, then Mafia boss appeared and locked the door behind him. The neon sign of the diner flickered with a dying buzz, casting a sickly yellow light over the pavement of Crown Ridge City. It was 3 in the morning, and the air held that specific kind of bite that settled deep in the bones, damp and unforgiving. Ava Moretti pushed open the heavy glass door, the bell above it chiming a hollow farewell to her 12-hour shift. She wrapped her thin, wool coat tighter around her frame, though it did little to ward off the February wind that whipped down the alleyways. Her feet ached in her worn-out sneakers, every step sending a dull throb up her calves. She counted the tips in her pocket by touch alone, mostly singles, a few quarters. Maybe enough to buy milk and bread if she skipped the bus fare for 2 days. This was her life now. It was a small, quiet life, defined by the smell of grease, the ache of fatigue, and the constant humming anxiety that lived in the center of her chest. But it was hers. She kept her head down as she walked. Crown Ridge was not a place where you made eye contact after midnight. The city was a sprawling grid of industrial decay and high-rise shadows, divided sharply between the people who owned the streets and the people who merely survived on them. Ava belonged to the latter. She walked quickly, her breath puffing out in white clouds, her keys already laced between her fingers inside her pocket, a habit she had never been able to break. Her apartment building was 6 blocks away, a crumbling brick structure wedged between a laundromat and a boarded-up electronics store. The streetlights here were broken, leaving the sidewalk bathed in darkness. As she turned the corner onto her street, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. It was a primal warning, a sudden drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the winter air. She stopped. A silhouette detached itself from the wall near the entrance of her building. The figure was leaning casually, a cigarette glowing like a single red eye in the dark. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. She knew that posture. She knew the set of those shoulders. "Hello, Ava." The voice was rougher than she remembered, scraped raw by cheap tobacco and time, but the cadence was the same. It slid over her skin like oil. Kyle. She could not breathe. The world tilted on its axis, spinning her back 2 years into the past. Kyle Morgan stepped into the dim light of the street lamp down the block. He looked older, harder. His hair was shaved close to his scalp, a remnant of the 18-month sentence he had just served, and his jaw was covered in uneven stubble. He wore a leather jacket that was too big for him, and his eyes, those pale, washed-out blue eyes, were fixed on her with a hunger that made her stomach turn. "You look good," he said, tossing the cigarette into a puddle. It hissed as it died. "Skinnier, but good." Ava took a step back, her grip on her keys tightening until the metal bit into her palm. "Kyle, you're supposed to be in jail. Got out early on good behavior. Can you believe that?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He took a step toward her. "First thing I did was come find you. Takes a lot of work to track someone down who doesn't want to be found. Ava, you moved 3 times. Stay away from me," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound strong. "Is that how you greet an old friend?" Kyle sneered, the mask of pleasantry slipping. "After everything I did for you? After I took care of you?" Flashbacks assaulted her, vivid and violent. She remembered the sound of a plate shattering against the wall near her head. She remembered the way he used to apologize afterwards, crying, telling her he only did it because he loved her too much, because he was scared of losing her. She remembered the night she finally left, the night he had come home drunk and smelling of another woman's perfume, and the rage had turned into something lethal. She had climbed out the bathroom window with nothing but the clothes on her back and a wallet with $40 in it. 2 years. She had spent 2 years looking over her shoulder, changing jobs, changing neighborhoods, living like a ghost just to stay out of his reach. And he had found her in less than a week. "I don't have anything for you. Kyle," Ava said, her voice gaining a fraction of volume. "Leave me alone." "I don't think so." Kyle moved faster than she anticipated. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Ava turned to run, but he was too quick. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers clamping down hard enough to bruise. "Let go!" she screamed. The sound swallowed by the empty street. He shoved her backward. Ava stumbled and hit the brick wall of the laundromat, the rough surface scraping against her coat. Kyle pinned her there, his body pressing close, boxing her in. The smell of stale beer and unwashed clothes overwhelmed her. "You owe me, Ava," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "I went to prison because of you, because you called the cops like a little rat. You broke my ribs," she gasped, trying to shrink away from him, to make herself small. "You almost killed me. And now I'm out, and I have nothing. No money, no place to stay." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You're going to fix that. You're going to give me whatever tips you have in those pockets. And then we're going up to your apartment, and we're going to figure out how you're going to pay me back for the last 2 years. "No," she sobbed, turning her face away. He slammed his hand against the bricks next to her head, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "Look at me! Don't you dare look away!" Ava trembled violently, her knees buckling. The terror was a cold, heavy weight in her gut. She was alone. The street was empty. The windows above were dark. "Don't cry," Kyle mocked, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. He traced the line of a tear down her cheek with a rough thumb. "No one will save you. Ava, you know that, right? It's just you and me. Always has been." Down the street, a heavy engine purred. A sleek, black sedan had pulled up to the curb quietly, the tires crunching softly on the grit. It was a car that cost more than the entire building Ava lived in. A phantom in the darkness. The back door opened. Dominic Vescari had just left the Obsidian, a private club 3 blocks over where business was conducted in hushed tones over 50-year-old scotch. He was tired. The negotiations regarding the waterfront territories had been tedious, and his patience was frayed. He wanted silence. He wanted the solitude of his penthouse. He adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal suit jacket as he stepped onto the pavement. He had seen the altercation from the back seat. Usually, Dominic did not involve himself in the petty squabbles of the street. The city was full of violence. It was the currency of Crown Ridge. If he stopped for every desperate act he witnessed, he would never move. But something about this stopped him. Perhaps it was the way the woman looked, small, fragile, pressed against the brick like a moth pinned to a board. Or perhaps it was the arrogance of the man, the sloppy, loud way he was wielding his meager power. Dominic hated bullies. He hated men who lacked discipline. He walked toward them. His footsteps were deliberate, the sound of his dress shoes echoing with a heavy, rhythmic authority on the pavement. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Kyle was too focused on terrorizing Ava to notice the approach until Dominic was 10 feet away. "I said, let go of her," Dominic said. His voice was not loud. It was a baritone rumble, smooth and terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a man who did not need to shout to be obeyed. Kyle whipped his head around, startled. He blinked, trying to assess the threat. He saw a man who stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that fit him like a second skin. Dominic's face was sharp angles and shadows, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Mind your own business, pal," Kyle spat, though his grip on Ava's wrist loosened slightly. "This is a domestic dispute. Walk away." Ava looked up, her eyes wide and terrified, swimming with tears. She saw the stranger. He looked dangerous in a different way than Kyle. Kyle was a wild dog. This man was a wolf. Dominic did not blink. He did not look at Ava. He kept his gaze locked on Kyle. "I will not ask you a second time. Take your hand off her." Kyle puffed his chest out, trying to summon the bravado that had served him well in the prison yard. "Or what? You think because you got a nice suit you can tell me what to do? Do you know who I am?" Dominic tilted his head slightly, a ghost of a dry, humorless smile touching his lips. "No. And that is why you are still breathing. But you know who I am." Kyle frowned, squinting in the gloom. He looked at the car waiting at the curb. He looked at the cut of Dominic's clothes. Then he looked at Dominic's face. Really looked at it. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from Kyle's face instantly, leaving him looking gray and sickly. Everyone in Crown Ridge knew the Viscari face. They owned the docks. They owned the unions. They owned the night. Viscari? Kyle breathed, the name coming out as a choked whisper. Kyle snatched his hand back from Ava as if he had been burned. He took 2 stumbling steps backward, his hands raised in immediate surrender. The aggression evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, groveling fear. "I didn't know," Kyle stammered. "I didn't. We were just talking. Just catching up. No trouble here. Mr. Viscari. No trouble at all." Dominic stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. He let the silence stretch until it was suffocating. "Leave," Dominic said softly. "If I see you on this street again tonight, you will not walk off it." Kyle didn't wait. He didn't look at Ava. He turned and scrambled down the sidewalk, half running, slipping on the icy pavement in his haste to get away from the man in the suit. Ava remained pressed against the wall, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. She clutched her wrist where Kyle had held her, staring at Dominic with wide, fearful eyes. She had traded one monster for another. She knew who the Viscaris were. Everyone did. They were not saviors. They were predators who ate the smaller animals. Dominic turned his attention to her. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the cheap wool of her coat, the raw terror in her stance. She was beautiful, in a tragic, broken sort of way. Her dark hair was messy from the wind, and her skin was pale as moonlight. "Are you injured?" Dominic asked. His tone was still flat, professional, but the lethal edge he had used with Kyle was gone. Ava shook her head, unable to find her voice. She pressed herself flatter against the brick, trying to put as much distance between them as possible. Dominic studied her. He saw the wariness. He respected it. A woman like her, in a neighborhood like this, survived by trusting no one. "My driver can take you to a hospital," Dominic offered. "Or the police station." "No," Ava croaked. Her voice was hoarse. "No police. Please." Dominic nodded once. He understood that too. Police in this city often caused more problems than they solved. "Then let me drive you home." "You live here?" He gestured to the building behind her. "I can walk," Ava said quickly. "I'm fine, thank you. Just thank you." She was terrified of him. She looked ready to bolt. Dominic felt a strange twinge of annoyance, not at her, but at the situation. At the fact that she looked at him with the same fear she had looked at the thug who had been assaulting her. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. Ava flinched, anticipating a weapon. Dominic paused, letting her see his hands were empty, before slowly withdrawing a sleek, black business card. He held it out to her. "Take it," he said. It wasn't a request. Ava hesitated, then reached out with a shaking hand. Her fingers brushed against his leather glove as she took the card. The contact was brief, lasting less than a second, but Dominic felt the tremors running through her body. "If he comes back," Dominic said, his voice low, "you call that number." "Why?" Ava whispered, finding a surge of courage she didn't know she had. "Why would you help me?" Dominic looked at her. The shadows of the street seemed to cling to him. "Because he lacks honor. Go inside. Lock your door." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back to the waiting sedan. The driver opened the door for him, and Dominic slipped back into the darkened interior. The car pulled away silently, disappearing into the night like a bad dream. Ava stood alone on the sidewalk for 10 seconds, clutching the card so tight the corners bent. Then, the reality of what had just happened crashed down on her. Kyle was back. He knew where she lived. She spun around and ran into her building. Fumbling with her keys, she practically threw herself up the 3 flights of stairs, her breath coming in sharp. Panicked gasps. She unlocked her door, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut. She threw the deadbolt, then the chain. Then she dragged a heavy wooden chair from her small dining table and wedged it under the doorknob. Only then did she collapse. She slid down the door until she hit the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Her apartment was a tiny studio with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that hissed and clanked, but it was usually her sanctuary. Now, it felt like a trap. She crawled across the floor to the kitchenette and pulled the largest knife she owned from the drawer, a chef's knife with a dull handle. She took it back to the corner of the room, furthest from the door and the window. She curled into a ball, clutching the knife to her chest with both hands. The tears came then. They weren't the loud, hysterical sobs of a child. They were silent, burning tears that leaked from her eyes and soaked into her jeans. Kyle's voice echoed in her head. "No one will save you." She looked at the card lying on the floor where she had dropped it. It was heavy, expensive matte black cardstock with gold embossed lettering. It simply said D. Vescari and a number. No company name, no title. She didn't call it. She couldn't. Men like Dominic Vescari didn't help waitresses without a price. She knew how the world worked. Nothing was free, especially not safety. Outside, a block away. The black sedan sat idling in the shadows of an alley. Dominic sat in the back seat, watching the third-floor window of the tenement building. He saw the light come on. He watched as a shadow moved frantically across the blinds. "Sir?" His driver, a man named Enzo, asked quietly, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Are we heading to the estate?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. He tapped his finger against his knee, a rhythmic, thoughtful motion. He could still see the look in the woman's eyes. It wasn't just fear, it was resignation. She looked like someone who had expected the blow before it even landed. It disturbed him. He was a man accustomed to violence. He dealt in it, managed it, profited from it. But the violence of a man against a woman, the cowardly exertion of power over the weak, it sat poorly with him. It felt like a disorder, and Dominic Vescari tolerated no disorder. "Wait a moment," Dominic said. He watched until the light in the third-floor window stayed steady, waiting to see if the ex-boyfriend would be stupid enough to circle back. The street remained empty. Dominic reached for his phone and typed a quick message to his head of security. "Find out who lives in 3B on 4th and Grand, and find a man named Kyle who was released from prison recently. I want his file." He put the phone away. He should not care. She was a stranger, a speck of dust in the grand machinery of his life. But as the car finally pulled away, merging into the desolate traffic of the city, Dominic couldn't shake the image of her trembling hand taking his card. He had the distinct, unsettling feeling that he had just walked into a room he wouldn't be able to walk out of. "Go," Dominic commanded. The car sped up, leaving the broken street behind, but the memory of the girl with the knife-sharp fear in her eyes traveled with him. The morning sun did nothing to warm the icy pavement outside the diner. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burning grease, stale coffee, and the collective misery of the breakfast rush. Ava Moretti moved through the chaos like a sleepwalker, her body running on muscle memory while her mind remained trapped in the events of the previous night. Every time the bell above the door chimed, her shoulders hiked up toward her ears, her heart stuttering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had barely slept. The image of Kyle's face, twisted with entitlement and rage, had haunted the few hours of fitful rest she had managed to snatch. And then there was the other face. Dominic Vescari. The man who looked at violence as if it were a spreadsheet to be balanced. The weight of his black card in her pocket felt like it was burning a hole through her apron by 2 p.m. The rush had died down to a slow trickle of truckers and regulars nursing bottomless cups of coffee. Ava untied her apron, tossing it into the hamper with a sigh that scraped her throat. She clocked out, grabbed her coat, and pushed through the heavy glass doors, desperate for fresh air. Kyle was waiting for her. He was leaning against a rusted sedan parked directly across the street, arms crossed over his chest, wearing that same smirk that used to make her feel small. He wasn't hiding in the shadows this time. He was out in the open, bathed in the gray afternoon light, daring the world to stop him. Ava froze on the top step, her hand gripping the metal railing until her knuckles turned white. "You look tired, babe," Kyle called out, pushing himself off the car. He didn't cross the street, maintaining a distance that felt more mocking than respectful. "Rough night?" "Go away, Kyle." Ava said, her voice tight. She started walking briskly down the sidewalk, keeping her head down, hoping to reach the bus stop before he could escalate things. He matched her pace from the other side of the road, his voice carrying easily over the light traffic. I was thinking about what happened last night, about your new friend. Vascari, big man, scary man. Kyle laughed, a sharp, grating sound. But he's not here now, is he? Ava kept walking, her eyes fixed on the cracked concrete ahead. I have nothing to say to you. You don't have to say anything, Kyle said. You just have to listen. I was going through some old boxes at my mom's place. Found some interesting things. Remember that trip we took to the lake house? Before you turned into a prude? I have photos. Ava. Ava stopped. The blood drained from her face so fast it made her dizzy. She turned to look at him, horror dawning in her chest. Yeah, Kyle said, seeing the look on her face. Those photos, the ones you begged me to delete. I didn't, and I'm thinking, if you don't want to help an old friend get back on his feet, maybe your boss at the diner would be interested in seeing them. Or maybe I just paste them all over the neighborhood. Local waitress bears all. Catchy, right? You're sick, Ava whispered, the nausea rising in her throat. I'm desperate, Kyle countered, his face hardening. And you owe me $5,000. Ava, cash, by Friday, or everyone in Crown Ridge gets a show. He made a gun shape with his hand, pointed it at her, and fired. Then he got into the rusted sedan and drove off, leaving her standing on the sidewalk, shivering violently in the cold. Ava made it 2 blocks before she had to stop and lean against a brick wall to breathe. The panic attack was a tightening noose around her lungs. He would do it. She knew he would. Kyle had no bottom, no line he wouldn't cross when he felt slighted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the black card. The gold lettering seemed to shimmer. D. Vascari. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling so badly she mistyped the number twice. She finally keyed it in and hit the green button. It rang once, twice. Panic seized her. What was she doing? She was calling a Mafia boss, a man who dealt in death. If she asked him for help, she would be trading one cage for another. What would a man like Dominic Vascari ask for in return for silencing Kyle? The price might be higher than money. It might be her soul. She ended the call before anyone could pick up. She stared at the screen, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. She couldn't do it. She had to handle this herself. She would find another way. She would get a restraining order. Even though a piece of paper had never stopped Kyle before, she would buy a new lock. She would figure it out. She deleted the call log, shoved the phone back into her pocket, and walked home, unaware that she was already being watched. Across the city, in an office that smelled of mahogany and expensive leather, Dominic Vascari sat behind a massive desk, reviewing a file on a tablet. Kyle Morgan, Dominic read aloud, his voice low and devoid of emotion. Petty theft, assault, domestic battery, possession with intent to distribute, released 3 days ago. He looked up at Enzo, who stood stoically by the door. He's a bottom feeder. Yes, sir, Enzo agreed. He's been circling the girl's workplace all afternoon. He approached her again today. Dominic's jaw tightened, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He set the tablet down with a precise, controlled movement. He had told the girl to call him. He had checked his personal line 3 times in the last hour, an action that irritated him with its pettiness. She had not called. She was proud, or she was terrified. Probably both. She is alone, Dominic stated, more to himself than to Enzo. She has no family in the city, no support system. A predator like Morgan smells that isolation. He will not wait. Dominic stood up. Buttoning his suit jacket, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling, gray skyline of Crown Ridge. He felt a pull, a magnetic tether drawing him back to the woman with the haunted eyes. It was inconvenient. It was irrational. But Dominic Vascari had learned long ago to trust his instincts, even the ones that defied logic. Put a detail on her, Dominic ordered, turning back to the room. 2 men. Standard surveillance. I want to know if he gets within 50 feet of her apartment building. You want us to intervene? Enzo asked. Only if her life is in danger, Dominic said, his eyes darkening. Let her try to fight her own battles if she wishes, but if he touches her, break him. Night fell heavy and fast over Crown Ridge. The wind howled through the alleyways, rattling the loose window panes of Ava's apartment. She had double-checked the locks 3 times. She had wedged the chair under the doorknob again. The apartment was small, suffocatingly silent, and every creak of the building settling made her jump. She needed to wash the day off. She needed to scrub the feeling of Kyle's gaze from her skin. She turned the shower on as hot as it would go, letting the steam fill the tiny, mildew-stained bathroom. She stripped off her clothes and stepped under the spray, hissing as the scalding water hit her frozen skin. For a moment, the noise of the water drowned out the world. She closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cool tile, letting the heat seep into her aching muscles. She didn't hear the front door splinter. The sound that finally broke through the roar of the shower was the distinct, heavy thud of a boot hitting the floorboards in her living room. Ava's eyes snapped open. Her heart stopped and restarted at a gallop. She turned off the water. Silence. Then a voice, muffled by the bathroom door but unmistakable. "Ava, I know you're in there. Babe, I can smell that cheap soap." Kyle. Terror, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. He had broken in. The chair hadn't stopped him. The locks hadn't stopped him. She looked around frantically. The bathroom was a trap. There was no window large enough to climb through. She was naked, wet and cornered. She grabbed her robe from the hook, jamming her wet arms into the sleeves and tying the sash with trembling fingers. "Come on out," Kyle taunted. The doorknob to the bathroom jiggled. It was locked, but the wood was rotten and cheap ply. "Don't make me kick this one down, too." Ava's eyes landed on the sink. A glass bottle of body lotion sat there, heavy, thick glass. She grabbed it, emptying the contents into the sink so she could grip the neck firmly. "Go away," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Ma, I'm calling the police." "You aren't calling anyone." Kyle laughed. A heavy thud shook the door, then another. The wood around the lock splintered. With a final, violent crash, the door flew open, banging against the tub. Kyle stood in the doorway. He smelled of whiskey and sweat. His eyes raked over her, lingering on the robe clinging to her damp skin. "There she is," he grinned. "Get out," Ava yelled, backing up until her legs hit the edge of the bathtub. Kyle lunged. He moved fast, closing the distance in the tiny room before Ava could think. He grabbed for her, his fingers tangling in the lapel of her robe. Ava reacted on pure instinct. She didn't cover this time. She swung the heavy glass bottle with every ounce of desperate strength she possessed. Crack! The bottle connected with Kyle's forearm as he raised it to block the blow. The glass shattered, shards spraying across the tile. Kyle roared in pain, stumbling back. Blood welled up instantly on his arm, dark and thick. "You bitch! You cut me!" He looked at the wound, then back at her, his eyes wild with a sudden, murderous fury. He stepped forward, raising his uninjured hand to strike her. Ava braced herself, screaming. Shielding her face with her hands, suddenly shouting erupted from the living room. Heavy, thundering footsteps shook the floorboards. "Police! Don't move!" A deep voice bellowed. Though it wasn't the police, it was the rough, aggressive shout of men who knew how to intimidate. Kyle froze. His head snapped toward the living room. He realized he wasn't alone. Panic replaced the rage in an instant. He looked at Ava, then at the small bathroom window. It was too small for him. He spun around and bolted out of the bathroom, shoving past the broken door frame. Ava heard him scramble through the living room, knocking over her lamp. She heard the heavy pursuit of other men, the sound of a struggle near the front door, and then the rapid, fading slap of footsteps running down the hallway stairs. "Get him! Don't let him reach the alley!" someone shouted. Then, silence returned. But it wasn't empty. Ava stood in the bathtub, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She held the jagged neck of the broken bottle in front of her like a dagger. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She just stared at the open doorway, waiting for the next monster. A figure appeared in the doorframe. It wasn't Kyle. Dominic Vascari filled the space. his presence sucking the oxygen out of the tiny room. He was breathing slightly harder than usual, his hair windblown, his suit jacket unbuttoned. He looked at the shattered glass on the floor. He looked at the blood splattered on the tiles. Then he looked at her. Ava was a portrait of devastation. Her hair was plastered to her skull, water dripping down her face, mixing with the tears she hadn't realized she was crying. She held the broken glass with a white-knuckled grip, pointing it directly at his chest. Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hands, palms open, showing her he held no weapon. "It's over," he said. His voice was a rumble of thunder, low and grounding. "He is gone. Don't come in," Ava gasped, waving the glass. "Stay back." Dominic ignored her. He stepped over the threshold, crushing glass under his expensive shoes. He moved slowly, telegraphing every motion, like approaching a wounded animal caught in a trap. "Ava," he said, saying her name for the first time. It sounded foreign and intimate on his tongue. "Put the glass down. You're safe. He broke the door." She sobbed, the adrenaline beginning to crash, leaving her lightheaded. He said he was going to... "I know," Dominic said. He was close now. Only a foot away. He reached out, his movement fluid and slow, and wrapped his large hand over hers, encompassing the jagged glass neck and her fingers together. "Let go," he commanded softly. Ava looked at his hand, then up at his eyes. They were dark, intense, and filled with something that looked terrifyingly like concern. Her fingers sprang open. Dominic took the glass from her and set it on the sink behind him. Then, her legs gave out. She didn't fall to the floor. Dominic caught her. He caught her as if she weighed nothing, his arms wrapping around her trembling frame, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest. He sank down with her, lowering them both until he was kneeling on the bath mat, and she collapsed against him. Ava buried her face in the expensive wool of his lapel and let go. A wail tore from her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish that she had been holding back for 2 years. She cried for the bruises, for the fear, for the shame of being hunted in her own home. Dominic did not pull away. He did not tell her to hush. He sat amidst the wreckage of her life, amidst the shattered glass and blood, and held her. One of his hands came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her wet, tangled hair. He brushed the strands away from her face with a tenderness that was at odds with the violence of the night. "Breathe," he murmured against her temple. "I have you. You're all right." Ava clung to him. She grabbed the fabric of his shirt, bunching it in her fists, anchoring herself to the only steady thing in her world. He smelled of winter air, sandalwood, and safety. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to be the strong one. She let herself break, trusting that he was strong enough to hold the pieces. After a long time, the sobs subsided into hiccuping gasps. Ava pulled back slightly, ashamed of her outburst, realizing she was clinging to a Mafia boss in her bathroom. She looked up. Dominic was watching her. His face was inches from hers. In the harsh glare of the bathroom light, she saw the lines of tension around his mouth, the storm brewing in his dark eyes. He looked furious, not at her, but for her. "I told you to call me," he whispered, his voice rough. "I was afraid," Ava admitted, her voice barely a sound. "Of me?" Dominic asked. "Yes." Dominic's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up to her eyes. The air between them shifted. It grew heavy, charged with a sudden, electric awareness. She was vulnerable, half naked in a robe, and he was the most dangerous man in the city. But he wasn't hurting her. He was shielding her. He reached up, his thumb brushing away a tear that clung to her lower lash. The pad of his thumb was calloused, rough against her soft skin. The touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "You don't have to be afraid of me, Ava," Dominic said, the promise dark and absolute. "Fear the rest of the world, but never me." Ava stared at him, her breath hitching. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own desperation, and beneath it, a spark of hunger that mirrored the sudden, confusing ache in her own chest. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to hide inside his coat and never come out. "What happens now?" she whispered. Dominic shifted, preparing to stand and take her with him. His expression hardened into resolve. "Now," he said, "I take care of everything." Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, harsh and unforgiving against the headache pulsing behind Ava Moretti's eyes. She blinked, shielding her face with a hand that felt heavy and foreign. The smell of antiseptic and mildew that usually greeted her in her apartment was gone, replaced by the scent of expensive leather, roasting coffee, and something crisp like rain on pavement. She sat up abruptly, a gasp catching in her throat. She was not in her bed. She was on a sofa that was larger than her entire kitchen, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that felt like water against her skin. The room was vast, a modern expanse of slate gray and chrome, overlooking the Crown Ridge skyline from a dizzying height. Memory crashed into her, the broken door, the glass bottle, the blood, Dominic. Ava threw the blanket off, her heart hammering. She looked down at herself. She was wearing a clean, oversized white t-shirt that hung to her knees. Panic flared, sharp and immediate, until she saw her own clothes folded neatly on a chair nearby, washed and dried. "You are awake!" The voice came from the open-concept kitchen. Ava spun around, clutching the t-shirt to her chest. Dominic Vascari stood by the marble island. He had discarded the suit jacket from the night before. He wore dark trousers and a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a faint, jagged scar running down his left wrist. He looked entirely too calm for a man who had walked into a crime scene a few hours ago. "Where am I?" Ava asked, her voice raspy. "My home," Dominic answered simply. He didn't look up from the stove, where he was expertly maneuvering a spatula. "I did not think you would appreciate waking up in a hospital, and your apartment is currently uninhabitable." Ava wrapped her arms around herself, feeling a flush of shame heat her cheeks. "I can't stay here. I have to go. I have work." "You have breakfast," Dominic corrected. He turned, plating 2 dishes with efficient movements. "Then I will take you to work." "I'm not hungry." Dominic finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, bottomless pools that seemed to absorb the morning light. "Ava, you fought a grown man last night. Your body is running on adrenaline and fear. Eat." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, but it was delivered without malice. He walked around the island and set a plate on the low coffee table in front of her. Scrambled eggs, toast, and sliced fruit. It was such a domestic, normal offering from a man who terrified the entire city that Ava felt her defenses waver. She sat back down on the edge of the couch. Dominic sat in the armchair opposite her, nursing a mug of black coffee. He didn't stare at her. He gave her the dignity of looking out the window while she took her first, hesitant bite. "Why?" she asked after a few minutes of silence. The food had settled the nausea in her stomach, giving her enough strength to ask the question that had been plaguing her. "Why did you bring me here? You don't know me." Dominic took a slow sip of his coffee. "I know enough. I know you are alone. I know the police in your district will file a report and lose it within 48 hours. And I know that men like Kyle Morgan do not stop until they are forced to." "He's crazy," Ava whispered, staring at her toast. "He is desperate," Dominic corrected. "Desperate men are dangerous, but they are also predictable." He set his mug down. "I have a contractor fixing your door. He will install a steel core frame and a deadlock that actually works. Until then, you stay here." "I can't pay you for that," Ava said quickly, panic rising again. "I make minimum wage plus tips. Dominic, I can't afford steel doors or this." She gestured to the penthouse. Dominic's expression hardened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Do you think I am presenting you with an invoice? Eat your eggs, Ava. We're leaving in 20 minutes. The drive to the diner was silent. Ava sat in the passenger seat of the black sedan. Dominic drove himself today, watching the city blur past. When they pulled up to the diner, Ava reached for the door handle, expecting him to let her out and drive away. Instead, Dominic killed the engine. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Walking you in." "You can't," she hissed, looking toward the large glass windows where her coworkers were already prepping for the lunch rush. People will talk. If they see me with you, everyone knows who you are." "Good," Dominic said. He exited the car and walked around to her side, opening the door before she could protest further. "That is the point." He walked her to the door, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. It was a possessive gesture, one that branded her. As they entered the diner, the chatter died down instantly. The manager, a gruff man named Earl who usually shouted at Ava for being 2 minutes late, froze behind the counter. His eyes went from Ava to the tall, dangerous man standing protectively behind her. Dominic scanned the room. His gaze was a physical weight, checking every face, every corner. Then he looked down at Ava. "I will have a car watching the street. He said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, but the intensity of it carried. "If you see him, you do not engage. You go into the kitchen and you call me?" "Okay," Ava breathed, unable to look away from him. "I will pick you up at 6. He turned and walked out. The silence lingered for 10 seconds after the door closed behind him. Ava hurried to the back to tie on her apron, her hands shaking, aware that the dynamic of her life had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer just Ava the waitress. She was the woman under the shadow of the Viscari family. For 3 days, the truce was held. Ava stayed at Dominic's penthouse, sleeping in the guest room, tiptoeing around the massive space while he worked late in his study. They barely spoke, but there was a strange, quiet rhythm forming between them. He would leave coffee for her in the morning. She would leave the lights on for him when he came home after midnight. Then, the escalation began. It started with the voicemails. Ava's phone began to fill up with them. Kyle's voice, slurring and angry, alternating between begging her to come back and describing in graphic detail what he would do to her when he caught her. Then came the photos. Not the compromising ones he had threatened her with, but photos of her taken from a distance. Ava walking into the diner. Ava waited for the bus 3 months ago. Ava buying groceries. He'd been watching her for a long time. But the breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Dominic had driven her back to her apartment to check on the repairs. The new door was installed, solid and secure. Ava felt a flicker of hope that maybe she could return to her life. She unlocked the new deadbolt and pushed the door open. She screamed. Lying on her welcome mat, right in the center of the small living room, was a dead pigeon. Its neck had been snapped, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. Next to it was a note scrawled on a napkin in jagged red marker, "Fly away home." Ava stumbled back into the hallway, colliding with Dominic's chest. Dominic looked over her head. He saw the bird. He saw the note. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't say a word. He didn't offer empty comforts. He reached out, grabbed the door handle, and pulled it shut, locking it firmly. "We are leaving," he said. His voice was terrifyingly flat. "He got in," Ava sobbed, her hands clutching her hair. "You fixed the door and he still got in." "He went through the fire escape window," Dominic assessed coldly. "He's not just watching. He is hunting." He took her arm, his grip firm but careful. "You are not staying here. Not tonight, not ever again." He drove her out of the city. They left the lights of Crown Ridge behind, heading toward the wooded hills that bordered the state line. Ava sat in the passenger seat, numb, staring at her hands. They arrived at a cabin, a safe house. Dominic called it was a fortress disguised as a rustic retreat, hidden down a long, private gravel road surrounded by dense pine forest. Security cameras blinked from the trees. The windows were reinforced glass. Dominic carried her single bag inside. He lit a fire in the stone hearth while Ava stood in the center of the living room, hugging her arms. "I can't do this," she said suddenly. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by a sharp, jagged anger. Dominic stood up from the fireplace, dusting ash from his hands. "You cannot do what?" "I can't be this." She gestured around the room. "The damsel. The kept woman hides in a tower while the big, strong man handles the monster. I'm not a pet. Dominic, I have a life. I have a job." You have a target on your back, Dominic shot back, his patience fraying. This is not about your pride, Ava. This is about your survival. Kyle is escalating. The bird was a warning. Next time, it will not be a bird. So what? I just hide here forever, Ava shouted, her voice cracking. I just wait for you to come back and feed me? You stay here until I end it, Dominic said, stepping closer. That is the deal. That is the code. What code? My code, he growled. No woman gets hurt on my watch. Not when I can stop it. Not when I have the power to crush the insect that is threatening her. Why do you care? Ava pushed, tears spilling over. I'm nobody. I'm a waitress who made bad choices. I'm damaged goods. Dominic, why are you wasting your time? Dominic stopped. He looked at her. Really looked at her, seeing the raw, gaping wound of her self-worth. The anger drained out of him, leaving only a heavy, aching sadness. You think you are damaged, he said softly. You have no idea what damage looks like. The fire popped and hissed in the silence. Ava sank onto the rug in front of the hearth, pulling her knees to her chest. The fight went out of her. He made me lie, she whispered into her knees. Dominic didn't move. He waited. 2 years ago, Ava said, the words tumbling out, a secret she had kept festering inside her for so long. Before I left him, I was pregnant. Dominic went very still. Kyle didn't want it, she continued, her voice trembling. He said we weren't ready. He said I was trying to trap him. One night, he came home angry. I don't even remember what he was mad about. The dinner was cold, or I looked at him wrong. He shoved me. I fell backwards into the coffee table. She took a shuddering breath. I lost the baby. And when the police came to the hospital, Kyle stood right there in the room. He held my hand. He told me that if I said anything, if I told them what really happened, he would go to jail for a long time, and when he got out, he would kill my sister. I don't even have a sister, Dominic, but I was so scared. I was so high on painkillers and grief. She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. So I lied. I told them I tripped on the rug. I protected him. I let him get away with it. That's why he thinks he owns me, because I helped him bury the truth. Dominic felt a rage so pure, so white-hot, that he momentarily lost his vision. It roared in his ears like a freight train. He wanted to burn the world down. He wanted to find Kyle Morgan and take him apart, piece by piece, slowly, painfully, but he couldn't show her that rage. She had seen enough rage to last a lifetime. He crossed the room and sat on the floor beside her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just occupied the space, a solid wall between her and the memories. He is a dead man, Dominic said. Dominic. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, as inevitable as gravity. He will never touch you again. I swear on it in my life. Ava looked at him, searching his face. She saw the darkness there, the violence he kept on a leash, but for the first time, it didn't frighten her. It felt like justice. She noticed something then. Dominic had unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt in the heat of the room. Below his collarbone, spreading across his chest, was a bloom of dark purple and yellow bruising. A fresh cut, stitched neatly, ran along his rib cage. You're hurt, she whispered. Dominic glanced down, dismissing the injuries. Work. A disagreement with a rival faction. It is nothing. It doesn't look like anything. Without thinking, Ava reached out. Her hand hovered for a second before she pressed her palm gently against the unblemished skin just above his heart. She could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his pulse beneath her fingertips. Dominic stopped breathing. He froze, staring at her hand on his chest. You have bruises too, Ava said softly. Just like me. Mine are earned, Dominic rasped. Yours were stolen. The air in the cabin shifted. The scent of wood smoke and rain seemed to intensify. The distance between them, which had felt like miles, suddenly vanished. Ava looked up at his face, the sharp jawline, the mouth that rarely smiled, the eyes that had seen too much death and were now looking at her as if she were the only living thing in the world. She didn't think so. She didn't plan. She leaned forward. Dominic didn't pull away, but he didn't meet her halfway. He let her choose. Her lips brushed him. He was tentative at first. A question. Is this okay? Then Dominic groaned, a low sound deep in his throat, and his restraint snapped. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, and he kissed her back. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was burning and desperate, filled with the taste of salt and smoke. It was the kiss of two people who had been starving in different ways, her for safety, him for redemption. Ava melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel the weight of him, the reality of him. Dominic tilted her head back, deepening the kiss, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her with a fierceness that made her head spin. For a moment, there was no Kyle, no Mafia, no danger. There was just the heat of his skin and the desperate slide of their lips. His hand moved down her back, pressing her closer to him. Ava gasped, arching into his touch, her body waking up, remembering what it was like to be wanted rather than possessed. Then Dominic stiffened. He pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. His hands were shaking slightly where they gripped her arms. "No," he whispered, the word harsh and jagged. Ava blinked, her lips swollen, her eyes dazed. "Dominic!" He pushed himself away from her, standing up abruptly and walking to the window. He gripped the frame, his knuckles turning white. He looked like a man at war with himself. "I cannot do this," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "I cannot take advantage of you. Ava, you are vulnerable. You are scared. You are clinging to the first thing that offers you protection." "That's not what this is," Ava said, standing up on shaky legs. "Isn't it?" Dominic turned to face her, his eyes blazing with self-loathing. "Look at me. Ava, look at what I am. I am not a hero. I am a man who breaks things for a living. I have blood on my hands that will never wash off." He stepped toward her, but stopped just out of reach. "You deserve light. You deserve a man who can give you a normal life, a family, peace. I am not that man. I am the shadows. If I let this happen, if I let myself have you, I will destroy you just as surely as he did." "You're wrong," Ava whispered, tears stinging her eyes again, but this time from rejection. "I am right," Dominic said, though he looked like the words were physically hurting him. "Go to sleep. Ava. The bedroom door locks from the inside. You are safe here." He turned and walked out the front door into the cold night air, leaving her standing alone by the fire, her lips still burning from his kiss, her heart aching for the monster who refused to be one. The revelation sat on Dominic Vascari's mahogany desk like a poisonous toad. It was a single file folder, thin and unassuming, but the contents shifted the entire axis of his world. Dominic stood by the window of his office at the Obsidian, looking down at the streetlights of Crown Ridge City. The glass reflected a man who looked composed, but beneath the charcoal suit, his muscles were coiled tight enough to snap. Enzo stood by the door, silent, waiting for the explosion. "The Scarpone family?" Dominic said, his voice dangerously low. "Yes, sir," Enzo replied. "We traced the deposit in Kyle Morgan's commissary account from 6 months ago. It was routed through 3 shell companies, all leading back to Tony Scarpone. They didn't just release a convict, they recruited a weapon." Dominic turned, his eyes cold. It made sense. The aggression, the sudden access to vehicles, the audacity to challenge the Vascari territory. Kyle Morgan was not just a jealous ex-boyfriend with a grudge. He was a pawn in a much larger game. The Scarpones had been trying to encroach on the waterfront for years. They knew Dominic's reputation for cold detachment, so they had found his one weakness before he even knew he had one. They had found Ava. "They are using her to draw me out," Dominic said. "They knew if they threatened her, I would step in. They want a war." "What are your orders?" Enzo asked. Dominic walked to the desk and closed the file. "Find the Scarpone lieutenant handling Morgan. I want to have a conversation with him. And double the guard at the safe house. No one goes in or out." But even as he gave the order, a sudden, sharp dread pricked the back of his neck. It was an instinct honed by years of living in the crosshairs. He reached for his phone, dialing the landline at the safe house in the hills. It rang and rang and rang. 2 hours earlier, the silence of the safe house had become a prison cell for Ava. She paced the living room, the plush rugs feeling like quicksand under her feet. Dominic had been gone for a day and a half. The isolation was gnawing at her, amplifying every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. But it wasn't just the loneliness. It was the sudden, frantic realization that she had left her mother's locket, the only tangible piece of her family she had left, taped to the underside of her nightstand drawer in the apartment. If Kyle truly burned her life down, if he destroyed the apartment as he had threatened, the locket would be gone. The thought sent a spike of panic through her chest that overrode all logic. She had found a weak link in the security detail, a young guard named Leo who looked at her with pity. She had pleaded, claiming she needed medication she had left behind, something crucial for her anxiety. It was a lie, and she hated herself for it, but the desperation to reclaim her past was blinding. Leo had hesitated, then agreed to a quick run. 20 minutes, he had said, in and out, the boss never has to know. It was the worst mistake of her life. The apartment building had been quiet when they arrived. Leo waited in the running car, scanning the street. Ava bolted up the stairs, her heart hammering. She unlocked the new steel door, rushed to the bedroom, and retrieved the locket. She clutched the silver oval in her hand, feeling a wave of relief. She turned to leave. The attack did not come from the door. It came from the closet. She didn't hear him until the floorboards squeaked behind her. Ava spun around, a scream rising in her throat, but a gloved hand clamped over her mouth before the sound could escape. "Did you miss me, babe?" Kyle whispered in her ear. His voice was erratic, buzzing with a manic energy. Ava thrashed, kicking back, her heel connecting with his shin. Kyle grunted but didn't let go. He jammed something sharp into the side of her neck. A sudden, icy cold spread through her veins. "Night-night," Kyle giggled. The world tilted sideways, the colors of the room smeared into gray. Ava's knees buckled. The last thing she saw was the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her, blurring into a vortex of darkness, before the floor rushed up to meet her. Consciousness returned in jagged shards. First came the smell. Damp earth, mold, and rusted iron. Then came the pain, a throbbing headache that pulsed behind her eyes like a heartbeat. Ava groaned, trying to lift her hand to her head. She couldn't move. Her eyes snapped open. She was sitting in a metal folding chair in the center of a dim, concrete room. Her wrists were zip-tied tightly behind the back of the chair. Her ankles were bound to the chair legs. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows against the water-stained walls. It was a basement, unfinished and cold. Finally! A voice echoed from the darkness. Kyle stepped into the circle of light. He looked worse than he had on the street. His eyes were bloodshot, wide with a chemical stimulant, and he was sweating despite the chill in the air. He was holding a smartphone, mounted on a tripod facing her. "Where am I?" Ava croaked. Her tongue felt thick, her mouth like sandpaper. "The VIP section," Kyle laughed, adjusting the angle of the phone. "My friends set this up. They really want to meet your boyfriend, Ava, but since he's a busy man, we're going to send him an invitation." "He's going to kill you," Ava whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a terrified observation. "Maybe," Kyle shrugged, pulling a switchblade from his pocket and flicking it open. "But he's going to have to pay the admission fee first." He tapped the screen of the phone. "Liv." "Hello." "Dominic," Kyle said to the camera, his grin stretching too wide. "Look what I found." He stepped aside, grabbing Ava's hair and yanking her head back so her face filled the frame. Ava gasped, squeezed her eyes shut, and refused to cry. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "Here's the deal," Kyle said, addressing the lens. "You have 2 hours. I want $5 million transferred to the account I'm about to text you. If the money isn't there, well, I started sharing things. I tell the world about Ava. I tell them about your business with the Scarpone family. And then I start carving." He brought the knife down, tracing the cold steel blade along Ava's jawline. "Tick-tock, Mr. Vascari." Dominic watched the video on his tablet in the back of his armored SUV. The sound of Kyle's voice, the sight of the blade against Ava's skin, triggered a physiological change in him. The rational, calculating Mafia Don ceased to exist. In his place was something ancient and terrifying. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint of red. His heart rate didn't spike, it dropped, slowing to the heavy, rhythmic thud of a predator on the hunt. "We have the location," Enzo said from the front seat, his voice tight. Leo tracked the phone's GPS before the signal cut out. "It's an abandoned meatpacking plant in the industrial district, Scarpone territory." "Drive," Dominic said. The word was barely a sound. It was a vibration. The SUV tore through the streets, ignoring traffic lights, a guided missile headed for impact. Dominic pulled his sidearm from his holster, a matte black semi-automatic. He checked the chamber. He didn't just want to save her. He wanted to dismantle the thing that had dared to touch her. The car screeched to a halt outside a dilapidated warehouse, surrounded by chain-link fences. 2 men, Scarpone soldiers, were guarding the perimeter. Dominic didn't wait for backup. He kicked the door open. One of the guards raised a shotgun. Dominic fired twice. 2 precise shots to the chest and shoulder. The guard dropped. The second man scrambled for his radio, but Dominic was already on him. He didn't shoot the second man. He pistol-whipped him, the heavy metal cracking against the man's temple. The guard fell to his knees, dazed. Dominic grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the brick wall. "Where is he?" Dominic roared, the sound tearing from his chest. I don't know," the man sputtered, blood leaking from his nose. Dominic pressed the barrel of the gun into the man's eye socket. "You have 1 second to decide if you want to live blind or die screaming. Where is she?" "Basement." The guard screamed. "The boiler room, down the east stairs." Dominic dropped him and moved. He moved with a speed that defied his size, a blur of vengeance cutting through the dark corridors of the factory. In the basement. Ava was running out of time. Kyle was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, checking the phone every 30 seconds. He was getting agitated. The money hadn't arrived yet. Ava twisted her hands behind the chair. The zip ties were thick industrial plastic. They bit into her skin, cutting off circulation. But they had a flaw. They were tied tight, but her hands were small. She remembered a self-defense video she had watched years ago, late at night after a shift, to slip a bind. You have to make the hand smaller than the wrist. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and focused on her left thumb. She needed to dislocate it. The thought alone made her nauseous. But then she looked at Kyle, at the knife in his hand, at the madness in his eyes. She looked at the phone, the dark eye of the world watching her humiliation. "No one will save you," he had said. "Then I'll save myself." Ava grit her teeth. She pressed her thumb against the metal frame of the chair, tucked it into her palm, and pulled. She shoved her weight down, twisting her wrist violently against the resistance of the bone. Pop! The sound was sickening, like a dry branch snapping inside her skin. White-hot agony exploded up her arm. Ava screamed. The sound strangled behind her clenched teeth. Tears blinded her. The pain was a living thing, consuming her entire nervous system, but her thumb was limp, folded unnaturally against her palm. Her hand was narrower. She slipped her hand with the sweat of her fear and pulled. The plastic tie scraped skin raw, tearing flesh, but her left hand slid free. Kyle spun around at the sound of her struggle. "What are you doing?" Ava lunged. It was a pathetic, desperate attack. She was still tied by her ankles and her right hand, but she swung her free arm, her fingers clawing at his face. Kyle shouted, stumbling back as her nails raked down his cheek. "You crazy bitch!" He recovered instantly. He backhanded her, a heavy blow that snapped her head to the side. Ava tasted blood. "That's it," Kyle snarled, raising the knife. "Time's up." The heavy steel door at the top of the stairs exploded inward. It didn't open. It was kicked off its hinges with a force that shook the foundation of the building. Dominic Vascari stood at the top of the stairs, backlit by the hallway lights. He looked like a demon rising from the pit. He took in the scene in a microsecond. Ava bound to the chair, blood on her lip, Kyle standing over her with a knife. Dominic didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He descended the stairs. Kyle panicked. He grabbed Ava, hauling the chair back, pressing the knife to her throat. "Stay back. I'll do it. I swear to God, I'll cut her." Dominic didn't break stride. He raised his gun and fired a single shot. The bullet didn't hit Kyle. It hit the knife. The impact shattered the blade near the handle. The force of it ripping the weapon from Kyle's grip and sending shrapnel pinging against the concrete. Kyle screamed, clutching his numbed hand. Before Kyle could recover, Dominic was on him. He didn't use the gun again. He holstered it. He wanted to feel this. Dominic tackled Kyle, driving him into the concrete floor with the force of a freight train. The impact knocked the wind out of Kyle with a wet crunch. Dominic straddled him, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He punched him. It was a brutal, piston-like blow that connected with Kyle's nose. Cartilage shattered. Kyle tried to cover his face, wailing, but Dominic tore his hands away. "You touched her," Dominic snarled, his voice unrecognizable. Another punch, this one to the jaw. Kyle's head bounced off the concrete. "You made her afraid." Another punch. Kyle was no longer fighting back. He was just gargling blood, his eyes rolling back in his head. Dominic wasn't stopping. He was lost in the red haze. He raised his fist again, preparing a blow that would cave in Kyle's skull, a blow that would end him permanently. "Dominic!" The scream cut through the roar of blood in his ears. Dominic froze, his fist hovering inches from Kyle's ruined face. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. He looked up. Ava was straining against her remaining bonds, her face pale and streaked with tears. She wasn't looking at Kyle. She was looking at him. "Stop!" she cried, her voice trembling. "Please stop!" Dominic stared at her, his eyes wild. "He deserves to die." "I know," Ava sobbed, "but not like this. Not for me. Don't become him for me." The words hit him, harder than any physical blow. "Don't become him." Dominic looked down at the broken, whimpering mess beneath him. He looked at his own hands, covered in blood that wasn't his. He felt the darkness clawing at him, begging him to finish it, to take the life that was owed. But then he looked back at Ava, at the light in her eyes that he had sworn to protect. If he killed this man in cold blood, right in front of her, he would taint that light forever. Slowly, painfully. Dominic lowered his fist. He stood up, stepping away from Kyle's unconscious body as if it were garbage. He wiped his hands on his trousers, trying to scrub away the violence. He walked to Ava. His hands were shaking as he reached for the pocket knife clipped to his belt. He cut the zip ties on her ankles, then the one on her right wrist. Ava slumped forward, her muscles giving out. Dominic caught her. He fell to his knees, gathering her into his arms, pulling her tightly against him. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her, sweat, fear, and life. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Ava wrapped her good arm around his neck, holding him just as tightly. She ignored the throbbing pain in her thumb. She ignored the blood on his shirt. She just held on. "You came," she whispered against his ear. "You saved me." Dominic pulled back enough to look at her. He scanned her face, cataloging every bruise, every scratch. His thumb brushed over the cut on her lip, his touch agonizingly gentle. "He will never touch you again," Dominic vowed. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. "He's finished. It is over." He stood up, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Ava flinched as her dislocated thumb jostled. "Your hand," Dominic noted, his eyes tightening. "I did it," she murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. "I had to get free." Dominic looked at her with a mixture of awe and devastation. She had hurt herself to survive. She was stronger than he had ever given her credit for. He carried her up the stairs, stepping over the debris of the door he had destroyed. Outside, the night air was cold and clean, scrubbing the smell of the basement from their lungs. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Enzo had called them to clean up the mess, to arrest the scar-pwned soldiers and collect what was left of Kyle. Dominic walked past his waiting men, past the SUV. He just needed to walk with her for a moment, to feel the weight of her living body in his arms. He set her down gently near the hood of the car, steadying her as her legs found purchase. Ava leaned into him, her body molding to his side. She reached up with her good hand, her fingers trembling as they brushed along his jawline, feeling the tension that still vibrated through him. "Let's go home," she said softly. Dominic covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm to his cheek. He closed his eyes for a brief second, grounding himself in her touch. "Yes," he said. "Home." He opened the car door for her, helping her inside with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. As they drove away, leaving the sirens and the violence behind them, Dominic reached across the console. Ava took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his, holding on as if he were the only thing keeping her from falling off the earth. Kyle Morgan was currently handcuffed to a hospital bed in the intensive care unit of St. Jude S. 3 floors up from the morgue. His face was a ruin of wire and gauze, his jaw wired shut, and he was facing a litany of charges that would ensure he never saw the outside of a cell again. Kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, extortion, and attempted murder. The police had found him broken on the concrete floor of the meatpacking plant, and the evidence against him, including the live stream he had foolishly broadcast, was irrefutable. For the city of Crown Ridge, it was just another violent night in the books. But for Ava Moretti, it was the end of a 2-year nightmare, or at least, it should have been. Dominic Viscari did not take her back to her apartment. He did not take her back to the safe house in the woods. Instead, he drove her into the heart of the city, to the tallest glass spire that pierced the rainy skyline, the Viscari Tower. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. It was a space designed for masters of the universe, a sprawling expanse of marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that cost more than Ava would earn in a lifetime. It was quiet. It was secure. It was impenetrable. And to Ava, it felt terrifyingly like a cage. It had been 3 days since the rescue. Her left hand was in a splint, her thumb immobilized to allow the ligaments to heal. Her body was a map of fading yellow and green bruises, but the physical pain was manageable. It was the silence that was drowning her. Dominic had been nothing but perfect. He gave her the master suite, a room the size of her entire old apartment, with a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. He had his personal chef prepare meals that were left quietly on the dining table. He had his tailor come and measure her for new clothes because her old ones smelled of the basement. But he also kept his distance. He slept in the guest room down the hall. He spent his days in his study or away at meetings, dealing with the fallout of the Scarpone situation. When they did cross paths, he was polite, solicitous, and painfully restrained. He treated her like a piece of fine china that had already been glued back together once and might shatter if handled too roughly. Ava stood by the massive window in the living room, looking down at the city lights blurring through the relentless rain. She wore a silk robe Dominic had bought for her. Clutching the lapels with her good hand, she felt like an imposter. She looked at the reflection in the glass. She didn't see the woman Dominic seemed to see. She saw a waitress with a broken hand and a shattered past. She saw a liability. She saw a burden. The old voices, Kyle's voices, began to whisper in the back of her mind, "You're nothing. You're just a drain on resources. He's only keeping you around because he feels guilty. Once the novelty wears off, he'll see you for what you really are." She turned away from the window, her breath hitching. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't live in this suspended reality, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She couldn't bear the thought of Dominic waking up one morning and realizing he was stuck with a broken woman he had saved out of pity. She had to leave, before she owed him any more, before she fell any harder. Ava went to the bedroom and found the canvas duffel bag she had brought from the safe house. It was pathetic how little she had. She packed her jeans, her few shirts, and the locket she had risked her life for. She dressed quickly, struggling with the zipper of her jeans one-handed. It was 2 a.m. The penthouse was silent. Dominic would be asleep. She slipped her shoes on, grabbed the bag, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was long and shadowed, lit only by the ambient glow of the city outside. She walked softly, avoiding the creaky floorboard she had memorized on day one. She reached the foyer. The private elevator awaited. All she had to do was press the button, ride it down to the lobby, and walk out into the rain. She would figure the rest out. She always did. She reached for the call button. Going somewhere? The voice came from the shadows of the living room archway. It wasn't loud, but it stopped her heart in her chest. Ava spun around. Dominic was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't asleep. He was fully dressed in black trousers and a white dress shirt, the top buttons undone. A glass of amber liquid held loosely in one hand. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deep, but his gaze was sharp, pinning her to the spot. I didn't want to wake you," Ava stammered, gripping the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned white. Dominic pushed himself off the wall and walked slowly toward her. He moved with the predatory grace of a jungle cat, eating up the distance between them. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated. "You were sneaking out, he stated, like a thief in the night." "I'm not sneaking," Ava defended weakly. "I'm leaving. I can't stay here. Dominic." "Why?" He stopped 3 feet from her. "Is the bed uncomfortable? Is the food not to your liking? Have I not given you enough space?" "You've given me too much," Ava cried, the whisper turning into a desperate hiss. "Look at this place. Dominic, look at me. I don't belong here. I'm a waitress from the bad side of town. I'm not one of your people." "You are my people," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave. "You are the only person in this building who matters." "Stop saying things like that." Ava stepped back, hitting the elevator doors. "You saved me, okay? You did the noble thing. You were the hero, but the movie is over. Kyle is gone. You don't have to keep protecting me. You don't have to keep pretending." Dominic set his glass down on the console table with a sharp clack. "Pretending? You feel sorry for me," Ava said, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm the broken bird you found on the street, and I am so grateful. Dominic, I owe you my life, but I can't be your charity case. I can't sit here every day waiting for you to realize that I'm not worth all this trouble." She gestured to the penthouse, to the security, to him. "I'm a mess," she sobbed, the emotion finally cracking her composure. "I have baggage. I have trauma. I have nothing to give you but problems." She turned and jabbed the elevator button repeatedly. "Please, just let me go." Dominic moved. He didn't grab her. He simply placed his hand flat against the elevator doors, effectively blocking her path. He loomed over her, his presence overwhelming, smelling of whiskey and rain. "You think this is charity?" he asked, his voice rough. "You think I brought you here because I pity you?" Ava looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. She felt small. She felt the echo of every cruel word Kyle had ever said to her. "Don't cry," she whispered, repeating the mantra she had used to survive the last 2 years. "No one will save you." Dominic's eyes flashed. A storm broke behind his irises, dark, intense, and terrifyingly raw. "I already did," he growled. He didn't give her time to argue. He didn't give her time to think. Dominic cupped her face with both hands, tilting her head back, and crashed his mouth onto hers. It wasn't a polite kiss. It wasn't the hesitant, careful exploration they had shared at the cabin. This was a claim. It was desperate, hungry, and filled with a terrifying amount of devotion. Dominic kissed her like a man who had been holding his breath for a lifetime and had finally found oxygen. Ava gasped, dropping her bag. The canvas hit the floor with a thud. Her resistance evaporated instantly. She didn't push him away. She grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, rising on her tiptoes to meet him. She kissed him back with a fierceness that matched his own, pouring all her fear, all her gratitude, and all her hidden desire into the contact. Dominic groaned into her mouth, the sound vibrating against her lips. He walked her backward, away from the elevator, away from the exit. Ava stumbled, but he caught her, his arm sweeping around her waist to anchor her against him. He broke the kiss, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. "You are not a burden," he rasped, his hands moving to frame her face again, his thumbs wiping away the tears. "You are the only thing in my life that makes sense. When I look at you, I don't see a victim. I see the woman who fought back. I see the woman who survived." "Dominic," she breathed, her heart hammering against his chest. "I am not letting you go." He swore. "Not tonight. Not ever. If you want to leave, you will have to fight me for it. And I warn you, Tesoro, I will not lose." Ava looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He wasn't keeping her because she was weak. He was keeping her because he needed her just as much as she needed him. "Show me," she whispered. Dominic's pupils dilated. He didn't need to be told twice. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her down the hallway, not to the guest room, but to the master's suite. He kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the world. He set her down on the edge of the massive bed. The room was dim, lit only by the city glow filtering through the rain-streaked windows. Dominic stood between her knees, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the sash of her robe. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice thick. "Tell me if you are afraid." "I'm not afraid," Ava answered, her voice steady. "Not with you." He untied the sash. The silk robe parted, falling from her shoulders to pool around her waist. Dominic inhaled sharply. He looked at her body, the curves, the pale skin, and the dark, ugly bruises that married her ribs and arms. He didn't look away. He dropped to his knees. Ava sucked in a breath as Dominic pressed his face to her stomach. His hands moved up her sides, barely skimming her skin, terrified of causing her pain. He kissed the bruise on her ribcage. It was a feather-light touch. A benediction. "I will worship every scar," he whispered against her skin. "I will replace every bad memory with a good one." He stood up then, shedding his shirt and trousers with impatient movements. Ava watched him, mesmerized. He was beautiful in a harsh, powerful way. His body was a landscape of hard muscle and old scars, a testament to the violent life he led. But tonight, that strength was entirely hers. He lay her back against the pillows. He moved over her, bracing his weight on his forearms so he wouldn't crush her. He took her face in his hands again, kissing her deeply, slow and languid. Ava wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. She pulled him down. When he entered her, he watched her face. He moved with a restraint that must have cost him everything, setting a slow, agonizing rhythm that was designed solely for her pleasure. Ava gasped, her head falling back into the pillows. It was overwhelming. It was too much and not enough all at once. "Look at me," Dominic commanded softly. Ava opened her eyes. His gaze locked onto hers, intense and unblinking. "You are mine," he said, thrusting slowly. "And I am yours. No one else exists," Ava sobbed. Not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of surrender. She wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper, kneading him closer. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just a body to be used. She was cherished. She was revered. The tension built, a tight coil in her belly. Dominic felt it. He abandoned his restraint, his movements becoming faster, harder, desperate to chase the release with her. Ava cried out, arching her back, her fingers digging into his shoulders as the world shattered around them. Dominic followed her seconds later, groaning her name into the curve of her neck, collapsing against her as the storm finally broke. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the glass. The room was quiet, save for the sound of their breathing. They lay tangled together under the heavy duvet, limbs intertwined. Ava rested her head on Dominic's chest, listening to the steady, powerful thud of his heart. His arm was draped over her, holding her close, as if he were afraid she might evaporate if he let go. She traced the line of the scar on his chest with her good hand. "Dominic?" she whispered. "Hmm?" His voice was deep, rumbly with sleep and contentment. "Do you ever regret it?" Dominic shifted, tightening his hold on her. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her in the half-light. His hair was messy, his face relaxed in a way she had never seen before. Regret what? He asked. Helping me, Ava said, looking down at the sheets. Getting involved. You started a war for me. You almost died. You broke your own rules. Dominic reached out and tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. I have many regrets in my life, Ava, he said seriously. I regret the things I have had to do to survive. I regret the violence I have brought into the world. I regret the time I wasted thinking power was the same thing as happiness. He paused, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her forehead. But helping you? He shook his head. The only thing I regret is that I didn't find you sooner. I regret every minute you spent being afraid before I got there. Ava felt a fresh wave of tears, but these were happy ones. She reached up and kissed him, a soft, lingering press of lips that sealed the promise between them. You're here now, she whispered. I am, Dominic answered, settling back down and pulling the duvet up over her shoulders. And I am not going anywhere. He pulled her head back to his chest. Ava closed her eyes. For the first time in 2 years, the darkness didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a blanket. She listened to the rain and the heartbeat of the man who had saved her, and finally, truly, fell asleep. The call came at 4 a.m, shattering the fragile peace of the penthouse. Dominic Vascari answered on the first ring. Ava, sleeping beside him, felt the shift in his body language before she heard a word. His muscles, relaxed in sleep, instantly coiled into hard lines of tension. He sat up, the sheets pooling at his waist, and listened to the voice on the other end of the line. Understood, Dominic said. His voice was ice. Lock down the perimeter. I want every available man on the street. He hung up and looked at Ava. The city lights from the window cast his face in sharp relief, highlighting the grim set of his jaw. He is out, Dominic said. Ava sat up, clutching the duvet to her chest. She didn't need to ask who. How? He was handcuffed to a hospital bed with 2 officers outside his door. Officers who were on the Scarpone payroll, Dominic explained, standing up and reaching for his trousers. During a shift change, they facilitated a transfer that never happened. Kyle is in the wind, and he has a 24-hour head start. Ava felt the familiar cold Deadpool in her stomach, but this time, it didn't paralyze her. She watched Dominic dress, strapping on his shoulder holster, checking his weapon. He was preparing for war. He was preparing to lock her away in a fortress until the threat was neutralized. He's coming for me, Ava said. It wasn't a question. He will try, Dominic corrected, pulling on a black tactical shirt. But he will never get close enough to breathe the same air as you. We are moving you to the safe house in the mountains. It is a bunker. You will be safe there. No, Ava said. Dominic paused, turning to look at her. Ava, this is not a discussion. I know, she said, throwing the covers off and standing up. She ignored her trembling hands. It's a strategy session. If he's out, he's desperate. He knows he can't fight you. Dominic. He knows he can't storm this tower. If I hide, he'll just wait. He'll disappear into the cracks of the city and wait for a month, a year, 10 years. I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. She walked around the bed and stood in front of him. She looked small compared to his looming frame, but her eyes were fierce. I am done running, she declared. I want to end this tonight. You are suggesting bait, Dominic growled, stepping closer. Absolutely not. He wants me, Ava insisted. He thinks I'm the reason his life is ruined. If he thinks I'm alone, if he thinks I'm vulnerable, he'll come out of hiding. He won't be able to help himself. I will not use you as a lure for a madman, Dominic said, his voice rising. I promise to protect you. Then protect me, Ava countered, reaching out to grip his forearms. Let me set the trap. You are the hammer, but let me bring him to the anvil. Dominic stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He saw the terror she was trying to hide, but he also saw the resolve. She needed this. She needed to be the one to close the door on her past, or she would never truly be free of it. The old apartment, Dominic said finally, the words tasting like ash. It is the only place he will believe you would go. The apartment smelled of dust and abandonment. Ava sat on the single wooden chair in the center of the living room. The new steel door Dominic had installed days ago was unlocked. The hallway was silent. It had been 3 hours. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain still. She was the bait. She had to sell the lie. She had posted a message on her old social media account, one she knew Kyle monitored, begging for help, claiming Dominic had kicked her out, claiming she was back at the start. It was a clumsy lie, but Kyle was not a rational man. He was an addict, and his addiction was controlled. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Ava stiffened. She didn't look toward the bedroom where she knew Dominic was waiting in the shadows of the closet. She didn't look toward the fire escape where Enzo was perched. She kept her eyes on the door. The handle turned slowly. The door pushed open. Kyle Morgan stepped inside. He looked like a phantom of the man she had once known. He was wearing ill-fitting clothes that looked stolen, a mechanic's jumpsuit unzipped over a stained t-shirt. His face was still swollen from the beating Dominic had given him, purple and yellow bruises blooming across his jaw. His eyes were wide, darting around the room, feverish and wild. He saw her. A slow, twisted smile spread across his split lip. "I knew it," he rasped. He stepped inside, kicking the door shut with his heel. "I knew he'd throw you away. Men like that, they don't keep trash like us." "Ava." "What do you want, Kyle?" Ava asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. "What do I want?" Kyle laughed, a wet, hacking sound. He reached into the pocket of the jumpsuit and pulled out a snub-nosed revolver. It shook in his hand. "I want what I'm owed. You ruined everything. I had a deal. I was going to be somebody." He raised the gun, pointing it at her chest. "You cost me $5 million. Kyle spat, stepping closer. "You think you can just walk away from that? You think you can just leave me to rot while you play princess in a penthouse?" "It's over, Kyle," Ava said quietly. "The police are coming." "Let them come," Kyle screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "I'm not going back. And neither are you. If I can't have you, Ava, if I can't have the money, then nobody gets anything." He cocked the hammer of the gun. The metallic click echoed in the empty room like a thunderclap. "You should have just paid me," Kyle muttered, his eyes losing focus. "You should have just done what you were told." "Why do you always have to make me hurt you?" "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Ava said. And as she said it, she realized it was true. He wasn't a monster. He was just a pathetic, broken man with a gun. "You should be," Kyle hissed, "because this is the end of the line. Babe, say goodbye." He tightened his finger on the trigger. Click. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home behind him was deafening in the silence. Kyle froze. The color drained from his face. He hadn't locked the door. "You forgot," a voice said from the darkness behind him, a voice that sounded like the deepest part of the ocean. Kyle spun around, the gun swinging wildly. Dominic Vascari stood in front of the door, leaning casually against the frame, his arms loose at his sides. He looked calm. He looked bored. He looked like death in a bespoke suit. "I don't knock," Dominic finished. Kyle screamed, a sound of pure animal panic, and fired. The shot went wide, burying itself in the plaster of the ceiling as Dominic moved. He didn't lunge. He flowed. He closed the distance in a blur of motion, his hand chopping down on Kyle's wrist with the force of a steel bar. The bone snapped. Kyle shrieked, dropping the gun, but Kyle was fighting for his life now. He didn't retreat. With his good hand, he pulled a knife from his belt, a jagged, serrated hunting blade, and slashed at Dominic's throat. Dominic leaned back, the blade missing his jugular by an inch, slicing through the fabric of his lapel. They crashed into the wall. Dominic drove a knee into Kyle's gut, but Kyle was fueled by methamphetamines and desperation. He didn't go down. He headbutted Dominic. Hard. Opening a cut above Dominic's eye, blood ran down Dominic's face, but he didn't slow down. He grabbed Kyle's knife hand, twisting it at unnatural angles. They wrestled for control, smashing into the small dining table, turning it to splinters. The gun was on the floor, spinning near Ava's feet. Kyle saw it. He kicked out, catching Dominic in the shin, breaking his hold for a split second. Kyle dove for the gun. Ava moved. She didn't scream. She didn't hide. She stepped forward and kicked the revolver with everything she had, sending it skittering across the floor and under the refrigerator. Kyle looked up at her from the floor, betrayal and shock on his face. "You—" He never finished the sentence. Dominic descended on him. He grabbed Kyle by the back of the jumpsuit and hauled him up, slamming him face first into the wall. Then he spun him around and delivered a right cross that sounded like a hammer, hitting wet clay. Kyle crumpled. Dominic didn't stop. The rage he had held back for weeks, the fear of losing her, the fury at the system that had let this animal loose, it all poured out. He straddled Kyle on the floor, his fists rising and falling in a brutal rhythm. Kyle was no longer fighting. He was barely conscious. Dominic's hand went to his belt. He pulled his own gun. He pressed the barrel against Kyle's forehead. His finger whitened on the trigger. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his brow into his eyes. "Die," Dominic whispered. "Dominic, no!" Ava threw herself onto his back, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "Get off, Ava!" Dominic roared, shaking with the effort to hold back. "He will never stop. He has to die. Not like this," Ava screamed, pressing her face against his neck, smearing her tears into the blood on his skin. "Look at me! Dominic, look at me!" Dominic froze. The gun didn't waver, but he turned his head slightly. He saw her. He saw the terror in her eyes. Not for herself, but for him. "Don't do it for me," Ava sobbed, her grip tightening. "Do it for yourself. You aren't him. You aren't a butcher. If you kill him like this while he's helpless, he wins. He takes a piece of your soul with him." Dominic stared at her. He felt the cold steel of the trigger against his finger. He looked down at Kyle, who was gurgling blood, broken and defeated. He looked back at Ava. She was the light. She was the tether keeping him from sliding into the abyss, slowly, agonizingly. Dominic lifted the gun. He stood up, dragging air into his lungs. He holstered the weapon. He reached down, grabbed Kyle by the collar, and dragged him to the center of the room like a sack of grain. The door burst open. Enzo and 4 uniformed officers, ones Dominic had personally vetted, stormed in. "Take him," Dominic ordered, his voice hoarse. "And tell the district attorney that if he escapes again, I will burn the courthouse to the ground." They cuffed Kyle, dragging his limp form out of the apartment. He didn't look back. He was done. Dominic stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly. Ava walked to him. She reached out and took his hands. His knuckles were split, raw and bleeding. "It's over," she whispered. Dominic looked at their joined hands. He brought her fingers to his lips, kissing them, tasting the salt of her skin and the iron of his own blood. "Yes," he said, collapsing his forehead against hers. "It is finally over." The rain had stopped, leaving the air scrubbed clean and smelling of ozone. They sat on the private terrace of the penthouse, 50 stories above the sleeping city. Ava was wrapped in a thick blanket, leaning back against Dominic's chest. He was sitting behind her on a lounge chair, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. His wounds had been cleaned and stitched. A butterfly bandage sat over his eyebrow, giving him a roguish look that made Ava's heart ache with love. They watched the traffic below, the red and white lights flowing like arteries through the city. "I used to hate this view," Ava admitted softly. "I used to look up at these buildings and feel so small, like I didn't matter." Dominic tightened his hold on her, burying his face in her hair. "You are the only thing that matters." Ava turned in his arms so she could look at him. "I'm not scared anymore. Dominic, not of him, not of the city, not even of you." Dominic's eyes searched hers. "You should have been scared tonight. It was reckless. It was necessary," Ava corrected. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "I had to save myself. Dominic, even just a little bit, so I could be whole for you." Dominic caught her hand and kissed her palm. "You have always been whole, Ava. I was the one who was missing pieces. And now?" "Now," Dominic whispered, leaning in until their lips were inches apart. "I am complete." He kissed her. It was a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of promise. Then he stood up, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Ava laughed, a genuine, light sound that floated out over the city. He carried her inside, away from the cold, away from the world below. The bedroom was bathed in the soft glow of the city lights, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dominic set her down on the bed. There was no rush tonight, no desperation, no fear of what tomorrow might bring. He undressed her slowly, his hands reverent. He kissed the scars on her soul as he kissed the skin of her body. When they lay together, skin against skin, it wasn't a collision of trauma, it was a meeting of equals. They made love with a slow, burning intensity. Dominic watched her face, memorizing every expression, every gasp. Ava held him, feeling the strength of his back, the beat of his heart against her breast. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper, anchoring him to her. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Dominic froze for a second, then moved with a renewed, fierce passion. "I love you," he groaned against her neck. "I worship you." When the quiet returned, they lay entangled in the sheets, the city watching silently from outside. Dominic held her, his arm draped protectively over her waist. Ava rested her head on his shoulder, her breathing evening out. She looked at the window one last time. The reflection showed a woman who was safe, a woman who was loved. Her eyelids fluttered shut. For the first time in her life, she didn't dream of running. She didn't dream of falling. She fell asleep in the arms of the man who had locked the door against the world, knowing that when she woke up, he would still be there. Thank you so much for listening to the final part of Don't Cry, No One Will Save You. My ex said, then Mafia boss appeared and locked the door behind him. This story has been an incredible journey of resilience, danger, and finding love in the darkest of places. I hope you enjoyed Ava and Dominic's emotional conclusion as much as I enjoyed bringing it to life. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Did the ending give you the closure you were hoping for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We have many more passionate, thrilling tales coming your way. Thank you for your support, and until next time, keep believing in love.